Welcome to Speedrunner Reviews. In this series I'll be analysing and reviewing games using the mindset of speedrunning. This video will look at the game from three perspectives. First, the casual experience, which is how most people will first play the game. This will look like a condensed standard review. Next we'll discuss the speedrunning experience, including all the interesting tech and how well the game holds up as a speed game. Finally, we'll look at the tool-assisted speedrun, showing what the game looks like when pushed to the theoretical limit. If you already know the game and want to jump straight to the speedrun part, I've left timestamps in the description. Today we're looking at Rastan, which was originally an arcade game released by Taito in 1987. And yes, that is the same Taito that made Space Invaders. Today we'll be looking at the Master System / Game Gear port. Before we get stuck into it, if you end up enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to keep up to date. I'm hoping to continue making videos like this and it really helps out a lot. So if you beat up this game, it's going to look pretty much like an RPG, but it's more like a side-scroller hack and slash game. So it's pretty much just a platformer. You play through the levels and there's a boss at the end of each level just like this one. Once you get to the end of the level, you'll just move on to the next. There are a few RPG elements like weapon upgrades, but more often than not you're just running to the right to win. Each stage is broken up into an outside area, then an inside area, and then the boss. And one of the difficult parts about this game is beating it in the 3 lives that you get to start off with. You'll find that you can get to level 4 or 5 pretty easily. You take a death on each level, but as soon as you have to get all the way to the end of all the levels without dying 3 times, it actually becomes quite a challenge. There is an infinite continues code on this game. If you hold down and left as well as the buttons when you're starting up, you'll make the title screen go blue and then get infinite continues. So that's one way you can approach this game casually without having to get really good at it. But if you want the full experience, you can try beating it without dying, which I've never actually done myself. One really cool part about this game is the day-night cycle. So it got a little bit darker there, and that's because we've spent too long in this level so far. And as you continue to move on, it eventually gets really dark, and more difficult enemies spawn in place of the normal enemies. So these green guys won't just be there anymore, there'll also be these bird enemies that come, and they're a lot harder to deal with. So it sort of adds that extra bit of challenge to the game that you want to get through the levels quickly as well as safely. Now I do have to mention the elephant in the room with this game. The physics are strange, to say the least. When you do a jump, you're automatically locked into that jump arc. There's no changing it. Now this is a fairly common thing with games, but the strange part about it is the jump loses speed as it goes on. So if I do a big jump here, I'm going to lose speed halfway through, even though I was holding left that whole time. And this can actually get really frustrating when you're trying to make a jump to, say, this rope here, and you just barely miss it, and Rastan slows down completely. There's also 2 different types of jumps, so you can do your small jumps just by pressing the jump button, or you can do your big jumps by holding up and jumping. And the big jumps actually go slightly faster than normal walking speed, so if you're doing a speedrun of this game, the optimal way is just to do big jumps all the way through it. The weird thing about jumping though is that you can buffer the inputs. So as long as you've let go of the jump button at some point, you can just keep holding down the button and you can jump frame perfectly on the ground no matter what. So the speedrun can actually be planned out really meticulously in terms of big jumps and small jumps. Just for an example of how weird these physics feel, I'm going to jump off the ledge here and keep holding left the whole way, but you can see Rastan comes to a dead stop there and there's nothing you can really do about it. It makes learning this game very awkward, but once you get used to it, you'll know the feel and where to jump. The other factor is that you can get stuck in pits like this, and then you have to sort of figure out a way to jump out of it, and some pits can be very difficult to jump out of. The other factor in this game is you've also got a wall kick ability, so you can go on a wall and sort of kick off of it. So it's probably one of the first games actually to have an example of a wall kick in it, and it works pretty well. All you have to do is jump at a wall and lose a bit of height, and then as soon as you're starting to move down, you can get a wall kick off of it. And that makes for some pretty fun platforming, especially on these rope sections here. The game has various weapon upgrades, like this sword here. That flame sword is the best one in the game, but your weapons only last for a particular amount of time, so what you want to do is get the powerful weapon and beat the boss with it, but then by the time you get to the next level boss, it's probably going to run out for you. I'd say they last maybe about 40 or 50 seconds for each weapon. You can extend this upgrade by getting the necklace item, but that drops randomly from enemies, so you can't really rely on it. Speaking of which, enemies can have lots of random drops, some of which are just like health or whatever, but others like the necklace or extra defense are really useful. The game overall is presented pretty well. It has some really nice graphics that are pretty fitting for an RPG game, even though this is not an RPG game. And the music's pretty good as well. Unfortunately, the music does seem to repeat itself quite a bit. They have like an outside theme and an inside theme and the boss theme, but each level pretty much has those same themes to the music. So it will get stuck in your head, but it's not very diverse. In typical Master System fashion, the game has a non-linear final dungeon that's pretty difficult. You'll test out your wall kicking skills like that, and you got to figure out where to go through the dungeon. There's also lots of invisible walls that you can walk through and everything like that. Pretty fun to finish off the game, but it can be pretty tense, especially if you're low on lives and haven't used the infinite continues code. Overall, even though the game is presented quite well, I think the physics flaws kind of make it not really worth trying casually. I'd recommend give it a go with the infinite continues code and maybe do one playthrough, but it's not going to be the most amazing experience you'll have. On the other hand, we'll see later on that the speedrun actually very much is worth trying. Because you can buffer those jumps, it becomes a really interesting run, which we'll look at next. So this is what the speedrun leaderboard currently looks like for Rastan. You can see there's a few runs on there, and this 937 at the top is pretty good. Now, the reason I became interested in this game is that it was part of something called the Master 8 race run by the Sega crew. This is 8 Master System games that you have to run through, and Rastan was one of them. Now, normally beating the whole game is too long of a goal, so in this case, Rastan, you had to get to the end of stage 5. And what I said about lives before, even getting to the end of stage 5 while only losing 3 lives is pretty difficult, so it was a tricky goal to meet. But I tried it out and I actually ended up tazzing it as well, and then we had the Master System race and it was really fun. So this is everyone running Rastan, and I hope that it leads to some more interest in the game and we get a few more runs of it, because while it is pretty janky to play casually, once you get used to the speedrun mechanics, it's a lot of fun to play through. So the run we'll be looking at today is the world record by 3Creepio. This was done on the Game Gear version, and as far as I can tell, it's pretty similar to the Master System version. There's a few very minor graphical differences with weapon pickups, but it seems the same even down to timing. So you can see 3Creepio is getting through level 1, but doing a very particular sequence of jumps. If you're familiar with the game, you can see it go like long, long, short, short, long, or whatever the level terrain requires. So what 3Creepio can actually do is buffer these jumps and pretty much do a perfect playthrough of the level each time. If you do that, then your enemy patterns are going to be predictable and you can sort of tell where they are. There is a bit of RNG that you can't control very easily in this game, like enemy drops and sometimes placement of enemies, but pretty much it's so controllable that you can just do it. 3Creepio is going to damage boost through a few things. When you do that, it's optimal to damage boost at the start of your jump, because the damage doesn't stop you from moving in your jump, but it does have a little cooldown timer before you can jump or move again once you hit the ground. So if you take damage at the start of a jump, you're going to lose a minimal amount of time for that. So pretty much that's what this run is. It's planning out all of your jumps in advance, knowing exactly where you're going to do it, and if you can get away with it, doing a bigger jump rather than a smaller jump. The reason for the bigger jump is it gives you a little bit more of a horizontal speed boost than a small jump does, so it's optimal to do that where you can. But of course, if you're going to bonk on walls or hit enemies or something, it's not worth doing it. Now, one of the hardest parts to do well in this run is actually the boss fights. We see this boss here, he's going to stun lock the boss by up-slashing into it. That is a lot harder to do than it looks. And doing these bosses requires a pretty deep understanding of the damage values. So depending on what weapon you have, it'll do different damage. So I said before the flame sword is the best, and that's the one on the bottom of that table there. You also do different values with an up slash, a down slash, or a side slash, also depending whether you're jumping or not jumping. So there's a lot of nuance to how the damage works in this game, and part of what you're doing with the bosses is, well, you're optimally hitting them as fast as possible, but then you're picking those slashes which do the most damage to them, and most bosses will be defeated with up slashes, we'll find. For the rest of the run, we're just going to see more optimal jumping. So you'll often do little walks to space out your jumps a little bit further to line up with damage boosts. and before landing on water or something like that, you'll see just coming up here, he's going to hit a fish. That gets rid of the damage inability period, so that rather than landing on the water and not being able to move, you're hitting the fish and not being able to jump again, and that's a lot faster than just waiting on the water to do another jump again. So there's lots of this stuff that's really tightly planned out, and you can see that the runner here has put in over 1,000 attempts. This is a very optimized speedrun. I also just want to shout out this bit coming up is the absolute worst bit of the game. It goes absolutely fine in the run, but this rope here that you have to jump on, you have to jump on the very bottom of it to jump up to that platform. If you're a little bit higher on the rope, then you're pretty much screwed. And with the jumping in this game, it's a big jump or a small jump. There's no other nuance to that. So if your jumps aren't quite lined up well, then you're absolutely screwed. You'll also see 3Creepio go out of the way for some more damaging weapons in the run. An example of that's coming up just here, where he goes and gets a flame sword. This probably only takes a second or two, but in a run this optimized, you really have to plan out, do you want that weapon or not? And also planning out getting it later on so that it lasts for longer for the boss. Now, though you can actually plan out most of the jumps in the run, some sections are a bit tricky than that, especially where you're wall jumping and jumping off ropes and everything. While in theory you can buffer those jumps, it's pretty hard to do so optimally. So that's where a lot of the skill of the run comes in, not to mention enemy patterns and boss patterns. They can vary a little bit, so you really have to know what you're doing and you have to use your intuition to fight the bosses. That's why this run doesn't just perfectly match the Taz or whatever, because there are those small bits where you have to essentially play the game normally. So overall, and I'm surprised that I'm saying this, but I would recommend this game as a speed game. When I picked it up, I thought, oh no, what have I got myself into? But having to do it for the Master 8 race, it ended up being a lot of fun. And being able to plan those jumps and optimize it, it was a really good experience to grind down the time. And it was also something that was very consistent to do for the race, which was a big pleasure to have. If you do pick up this game, you'll find a community of people who are going to be pretty interested in it now. We had a lot of races in that Master 8 race, so I think if the world record were to come down further, there'd be people pretty interested in that happening. That being said though, the world record here is very optimal, so if you're going into this with a headset of wanting world record, it's going to be a very difficult time to beat. So now let's move on to looking at the Taz. I ended up Tazzing this game, mainly because I was interested in it for the Master 8 race. I wanted to get good at the game, so I thought, oh, maybe I'll try Tazzing it and see if that can help me through it. So that's exactly what I did. The Taz ends up being a 9:32 with Taz timing, but in RTA timing that's a 9:18. So it's about 19.5 seconds faster than the RTA world record. And that should go to show just how optimized the RTA record is, because, well, 19 seconds off the Taz is pretty good. So in terms of the time save, the main thing is coming from bosses. There isn't a lot of time save in the levels, and that's due to the buffered nature of the jumps. Even in a Taz, there's not much you can do to get around it. Where we do save a lot of time though is in the enemy drops. So I mentioned before the necklace item, we're going to see that here. And what that does is it doubles the amount of time that you have your weapon for. So if you've got 50 seconds left, it bumps it up to 100 seconds left. Now this only works if you have less than 50 seconds left, otherwise it just doesn't do anything. So the maximum time you can get up to is that 100 seconds left. But that's pretty good for our purposes. And when the time runs down again, all you need to do is, well, you need to kill another enemy, manipulate another necklace, and then get the time to come up again. What this lets us do is it lets us bring the more powerful weapons into the boss, but it also lets us avoid slowing down to collect other weapons because we're just taking our original weapon, we're extending the time of it. And that does carry across levels too. So that's going to be the main reason that Taz saves a lot of time over RTA, although the RTA speedrun actually does get pretty good luck with necklaces as well. There's obviously been some grinding there in that run to make sure that the best luck was achieved, so it's not as far apart as you might expect Taz and RTA to be for that reason. Now, given the nature of this necklace item and how it extends your weapon for longer, it's one of the most powerful items in the run, so I was really keen to find a way to manipulate it in the Taz, and it turns out just by pressing buttons at slightly different times you can manipulate whatever item drops you want on the enemy that's going to drop the item. But I was really curious about RTA because they got really good luck in that world record, so I reached out to the world record holder, and apparently it is just really good luck. They didn't have a way to manipulate it. which is really impressive, and it just goes to show more and more how optimized this run is. Apparently it's a little bit more likely in the Game Gear version to get drops from enemies, but even that being said, it's still a very low chance to get this necklace, and it shows you how much effort was put into grinding this run out. They also said about some more differences between the Game Gear and the Master System version, like some health values are a bit higher, and also I noticed that one of the levels takes longer to load on the Master System version, so it looks like Game Gear might actually be optimal for this game. Another really cool thing 3 Creeper showed me was this glitch that had happened to someone playing Rastan. They picked up a weird item and then all of a sudden the game just completely broke for them, so they fell through the floor, and we'll see pretty quickly the graphics glitch out on the level. Also, there's walls either side of where they are, so they can't move from that. But that's probably the only potential improvement on a large scale for this run, is something like that glitch being used to save significant time. It would be pretty cool if we could make that work, but nobody really knows what caused this glitch in the first place. The main time save for Taz over RTA is the boss fights. For example, this one here, we get a lot of hits in on the boss, and the boss movement can be a bit random about what direction it turns, so it's about knowing where it's going to turn and how to manipulate that, and then get in as many hits as possible, as quickly as possible, of course making sure they're up slashes or down slashes as well. This boss here is particularly optimized in the Taz. This boss can be pretty random for RTA, so it's hard to do it well, but it's done very quickly there. And timing for Taz is timed to the last input. That's why it looks a little bit different to RTA timing, because we have the starting sequence that's included in the Taz, but then the Taz timing finishes a little bit earlier because it's just to the last input. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Rastan. So, would recommend it as a speed game, would not recommend it casually too much, although I'm sure if you had it on the Master System back then it would have been good fun. I would have liked to have seen a few more RPG elements, since that seems to be what it's playing into a bit more. But you can never turn down a really good normal platformer, so I'm not overly disappointed about that. The upgrade system is pretty cool and unique with the timer-based weapon expiry, and it makes for some interesting strategies. It also seems to be pushing you through the game to go quickly with it turning to night time and also having your weapons run out. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video then a subscription is always appreciated. I should have more coming out like it soon.